In 1848, the USA had beaten Mexico in a war and had the whole country open. They knew they were going to take some land. That much was guaranteed. But suddenly there was a debate. Take all of Mexico or just the top half? They chose the top half. Not because they couldn't take more, but because of what they believed. What did America learn about itself that stopped it in its tracks? Back in 1846, when the war started, the USA had huge advantages over Mexico. Better economy, better military technology, and a much bigger population. And to be clear, most countries in the world would have struggled against the USA at the time. They weren't what they are now, but they would have been a match for most European countries and were easily the most powerful in the New World. They had better artillery training, better heavy industry, better diplomacy with Europe, and was ridiculously rich in comparison with anyone in Latin America. Although that term didn't exist yet. With all of that in mind, they hoped to win the war in months. They didn't. It took 2 full years to end the war, costing way more and with a loss of life way higher than anyone in the USA was expecting. So we have to give Mexico credit for making them work so hard. But even with those costs, they had Mexico City in the palm of their hand, and most of the country. If the USA could have picked any moment in the past 150 years to invade Mexico, this era would be right near the top of the list. Mexico was in trouble, war or no war. For a while, the Liberal Party in Mexico was trying to make it into a mini USA. In fact, the official name of the country is the United States of Mexico. They liked what the USA was selling and wanted to copy it. But there were some groups who had a few things to say about that. The Catholic Church, military leaders, and Los Caudillos, kind of warlords. The government and the military didn't trust each other, and more often than not, neither supported the other. The army didn't get enough funding, and the military leaders were nobles who had no respect for the government or their soldiers. Even that being on the edge of civil war, they just weren't set up to fight a big war. On the eve of war, some of the states had local uprising. Most of them didn't even send troops to fight once war was declared by the USA. There was no real patriotism at the local level. They hadn't picked the government, so why should they care? Even then, once the war was declared, the Mexican government needed money, and the obvious place to go was to the Catholic Church. The church responded with armed rebels who bogged down the army in the early stages of the war. So yeah, the USA couldn't have picked a better point in recent history to conquer Mexico. But who are the people looking to take the whole thing? They were known as the All Mexico Movement. And 1848 was an election year, so they had power. The sitting president was James Polk, but he had this to say on the All Mexico Movement and one of the potential presidential candidates who backed it. "I cannot help labouring under the conviction that the true reason of Mr. Buchanan's present course is that he is now a candidate for the presidency, and he does not wish to incur the displeasure of those who are in the favour of the conquest of all Mexico." Presidential candidates were using this as a way to differentiate themselves, and Polk was effectively a sitting duck president at the exact point the peace treaty was being negotiated. So it's not hard to see how this really could have happened. The reason it didn't is because of how strong the opposition was. This is John C. Calhoun, the ringleader of that opposition, and he had some spicy takes. He's against the All Mexico movement on racial grounds. Some argued that this is the same as the land the USA had already conquered from the Indians. What's the difference? He fought back by pointing out the truth. It's very rare you get this sort of person who does tell the truth. The white settlers killed or drove out the Indian population and then took it in the USA. This time they'd have to add a lot of Mexicans and Indians to the USA. Calhoun and his allies said, "No gracias." Don't believe me? Here's what he said. "I know further, sir, that we have never dreamt of incorporating into our union any but the Caucasian race, the free white race. To incorporate Mexico would be the very first instance of the kind of incorporating an Indian race, for more than half of the Mexicans are Indians, and the other is composed chiefly of mixed tribes. I protest against such a union as that. Are we to associate with ourselves as equals, companions, and fellow citizens the Indians and mixed race of Mexico? Sir, I should consider such a thing as fatal to our institutions." He really wasn't alone. Others hated the idea because of the potential political nightmare, more on that later, and yet more just hated Catholics and said, "No mas." The idea that taking too much Mexican land would be poisonous starts to take over their minds. Yeah, America's favourite pastime. Racism strikes again, with a sprinkling of anti-Catholic hate. But imagine for a second that they could get over their stinky racism. What would the political consequences have been? Even if they weren't racist, was it politically possible to take the whole thing? And Texas gives us a huge hint as to what the true problem was. Texas was so big that there was talk of breaking it up into 5 states as they took it from Mexico. No big deal, right? Except for the Compromise of 1820, which tried to keep an equal amount of slave and free states to stop any side having too much power. If Texas, which was explicitly pro-slavery, was split into 5, then 5 new pro-slavery states would have been created, massively shifting the balance of power towards slave states. Now take that concern and multiply it by the amount of states that would have been created if all of Mexico had been added. You can see why the opposition to the All Mexico movement was so strong. Both abolitionist and pro-slavery sides in the USA were worried about the fragile state of their country. And they were right to be. In the end, they keep Texas as one slaveholding state. But here's a little bow to add to all of that. This is what someone at the time said. Ralph Waldo Emerson had this to say on the conquest of Mexico. The United States will conquer Mexico, but it will be as the man who swallows the arsenic which brings him down in turn. Mexico will poison us. In the end, they settle for just the Mexican cession. Northern California, Texas, or Tejas, and the Southwest. But these new acres of territory were a poison pill. The USA was heading for civil war. So the simple reason the USA didn't conquer more wasn't due to not being able to militarily. It's because some hated Catholics, others hated Indians and non-white people, and others were more worried about what it would do to the balance of slave and non-slave states. The very issue that would dominate the next 2 decades of US history. And after all of that, poor Mexico was still in trouble. Their own civil war gets worse, and then along comes Napoleon's nephew looking to conquer it. Watch this to see how another colonizer nearly wiped Mexico off the map.